When coming up with a Toys to Life game, there are two important aspects: the game itself, which we'll be looking in the next video, and the actual toys themselves, the roster. The roster is very important in Skylanders. The Skylanders have to look cool, be extremely powerful in the game, and Skylanders you could just have fun with in general. You have to also make sure that your roster is well rounded. You can have Skylanders you can love from the start, Skylanders that get a lot more powerful the more you upgrade them, or Skylanders that become extremely overpowered in the end. Of course, not every roster is perfect, so that's why today I'll be ranking all 6 rosters from all 6 games from worst to best. To rank the rosters, I'll have to look at the design aspect of the characters, how well they work in game, and also just to see how many favorites I have of said games. Now, let's hop into the video. And before we do actually get into the video, at the end of the day, this is my personal opinion. So if your favorite roster of all time is on this list, please don't be mad. This is just my opinion. And with that, let's just get on the list, shall we? Starting at the very bottom of this countdown, we have the Swap Force roster. Here are my top 4 favorite Skylanders from that era. If you've seen my top 20 favorite Skylanders, you will notice that there isn't any Swap Force characters on this list. That's because I don't really have much pleasure playing as the Swap Force characters. Let's start with the main attraction of Swap Force, the Swappers. They have a unique gimmick that lets them switch bodies. Admittedly, that is a cool gimmick. I'm not gonna lie, it is pretty fun. But the trouble is that most of the Swappers can do fine with their original bodies. And swapped or not, most of the Swappers I don't find interesting. The only Swapper characters I would actually consider placing in my top 30 is Trap Shadow and Grilla Driller. Blast Zone is also a pretty cool Swapper, but he wouldn't be in my top 30. I guess I started to appreciate the Swapper's existence after realizing that Washbuckler is actually a half-decent Skylander, even though I'm not a big fan of his complexity overall. Now for the Skylanders Swap Force cores. In my personal opinion, the Swap Force cores are very weird. On a design aspect, I swear Activision just saw a random animal at a game reserve and thought, hey, I can make that into a Skylander. So, obviously Rhino, he's a fire rhino. Amazing concept. Oh, how about Scorp? He's a scorpion, and in fact, the name implies that he is a scorpion. Wow, amazing. And then Riptide, despite having probably the coolest name out of all the other Swap Force cores, he's just a fishman, similar to Gilgrunt. The Swap Force cores just don't give me that Skylanders feeling, and I feel they're just knockoffs rather than actual Skylanders. In fact, Roller Brawl and Grim Creeper are the only Swap Force cores I actually consider to have the aforementioned Skylanders feel, and both of them are the Undead cores, which is absolutely strange. So that means that leaves us with the Series 3 and Series 2 reposes. I only had a few of these, but Series 3 Trigger Happy, his WoW power was awful, and I had Series 2 Sprocket. Well, not long ago. I gave her to my friends recently because you know how she did amazing at Last Shot. Yeah, her WoW power wasn't that creative at all. And the only repose I liked from the reposes I have is Anchors Away Gilgrunt, but even his repose, even his WoW power is not that amazing because it requires angling, and I prefer to just go into battle and shoot ahead rather than angle my weapon. Swap Force in itself is a great game, but personally I just rather use the original characters from Giants and Spyro's Adventure than the actual characters from Swap Force. Okay, and number 5 we have Skylanders Imaginators. Now, here's my favourite sensei, Blastertron. Notice how there's only one character there. That, ladies and gentlemen, is my problem with the Imaginators roster. The Skylanders Senseis do give me the Skylanders feel, yet that's why it's higher than the Swap Force roster. but they're just so overpowered. That is my problem. They are overpowered, their attacks chain together too well, but they're just not fun. At least with Swap Wars there was 4 or 5 characters that I liked, but in Imaginators there's only one character I considered fun and overpowered, and that's Blastertron. Also, a fact worth mentioning, in Imaginators they nerfed all the original characters except for the Imaginators cast, just so that they can force kids to buy the Imaginators toys, which is just so wrong, and it's such a stupid mistake on behalf of Activision. And ultimately, that's why when I buy Skylanders, I don't normally go for the senseis. Well, I would go for Robo if he wasn't that bloody expensive. In full honesty, the Skylanders Imaginators roster should be at the bottom of the list, but because they at least give me the Skylanders feel, as mentioned before, that's why I only placed it at number 5. Okay, now we're starting to get better with our rosters, starting with the Giants roster. My biggest flaw with the Skylanders Giants roster is the fact that it's so small, with most of the figures just being reposes from Skylanders Spyro's Adventure. Luckily, these reposes are worth it, because most of the Wow Pals are actually pretty effective. Examples include Eruptor's Series 2 Wow Pal, as it improves his third attack by millions. I despise Eruptor's tertiary attack, and they made it so much better with his Series 2 Wow Pal. Another example is Drill Sergeant, where his cannon gets increased damage, which is really helpful for me. Terrafin, same here too. Now when he buries underground, you can also do a belly flop and then go back down underground, which does really make sense for a dirt shock like Terrafin. Now, for Skylanders Giants, they were limited to 1 giant and 1 new core each. Luckily, this gave Activision the time to try make them as most memorable as possible. While the Giants are slow, they at least pack a punch, which is actually great, and the only 2 Giants I'm not a big fan of is Crusher, I despise Crusher, and Eyeball. He's just average in my opinion. While the Giants cores, they are fantastic. All of the Giants core I love, except for Sprocket. But we do not talk about Sprocket in this channel. So for example, our 2 core representatives, Pop Fizz and Jetvac. Pop Fizz can change potions, and that affects his beast form and the puddles that he leaves, which is quite a good technique. Whereas with Jetvac, he can not only shoot at enemies, but he can also suck them up. And if you choose the right upgrade path, he can suck things up and then shoot out, which is such a clever technique, not to mention that Jetvac has a lot of personality to go with. The Giants roster does have a bit of flaws here and there, but it's quite a good roster nevertheless. So the number 3 spot is going to be a pretty controversial one, as I heard so many bad things about this roster, but for number 3 we have the Superchargers roster. Like the Skylanders Giants roster, this roster is also pretty small, apart that they don't have any reposes where they add a new Wow Pow. Instead they get actual reposes where they change the Skylander completely. But so far, the only Skylanders Superchargers repose I have, I'm just getting up so that I can get her, is Superstar Stealth Elf from the Starter Pack. And she's not that great, I'm not gonna lie. Fortunately, I got my eye on some pretty useful Skylanders Superchargers reposes that I might get sometime in the future, such as Hurricane Jetvac and Sharkshooter Terrafin. So maybe then I can form a more better opinion on the Superchargers reposes. So for that fact alone, that's why I only placed the Superchargers roster in this spot. Now, the new Superchargers are a much different story. Again, like with a small cast of new Skylanders and Giants, this gives the toy makers the opportunity to make the Skylanders Superchargers have lots of personality, and we even give our own special quotes when we do certain missions. While I do have a very small Superchargers collection, so far I quite like the Skylanders I got from that collection, and there's no Skylander I dislike from this part of the franchise. except for Supercharged Stealth Elf. Next up, we have Skylanders Trap Team, my second favorite Skylanders roster. Compared to all the other rosters, this one has the least amount of reposes, with Skylanders only returning for the fire, water, life, air, and magic elements, with tech, undead, and earth not getting any reposes of any sort. I don't understand why Activision made that decision, but then again, most of the reposes I have are pretty cool. I mean, Gilgun's repos and Jetpack's repos, they're all pretty amazing. Going along with the Trap Team cores, the Trap Team cores, while I did not seem to care about them that much when I was younger, are actually pretty solid Skylanders. They were a massive step up compared to Swap Force lackluster core roster, and instead we get pretty inventive and original cores, such as Treadhead, who's literally a Skylanders on a vehicle. This was before Superchargers came out, so Treadhead was ahead of his time. And then we also got other cooler ones like Echo, who is a sea dragon that loves listening to music. Trust me, Echo's great. Then there's the Trap Masters. The Trap Masters are all pretty unique, with something interesting going for them. With every Trap Master, they each have a different crystal weapon. For example, Gusto is the only Trap Master to have a crystal boomerang, and Night Light is the only Trap Master to have a crystal Scimitar, if that's how you pronounce this blade. I do not know how to pronounce blade correctly. From what I gathered so far from the Trap Team roster, there's only one Skylander I dislike from that very roster, and that's Funny Bone. So far, Trap Team is doing quite well. So I guess this leaves us with the Spyro's Adventure roster, the original 32. The original 32 Skylanders are just so unique in their own way. The whole reason why they're at number 1 is, well, 1, they are compatible with all the games, so you can still keep on playing as them, even though they don't get any reposes in the later games, which is so cool, and the backwards compatibility is why I love the Skylanders franchise. And second of all, there's not a single Skylanders character in Spyro's Adventure that I dislike. None of them. Even Warnado, who still wound up in my top 10 worst, I even like him. I guess this was back then, when Skylanders was just starting out, and all the designers had fresh ideas coming out of their heads, compared to Skylanders that are named after a single creature and that. I mean, you got Trigger Happy, a little gremlin dude that can rapid fire his golden cannons. Zook, a mobile band bazooka who can shoot bazookas around and defend himself. Drill Sergeant, who can shoot his drill rockets while using his upper cannon simultaneously. Ghost Roaster, who can kill enemies' ghosts and then eats them, and the list goes on and on and on. There's just something I like with each of the Skylanders from Spyro's Adventure. So that is going to be it with this video. What are your favourite roster of Skylanders? I'm open to any opinions. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.